The gravel on our front walk had not been swept in weeks. I noticed it the moment my cab pulled up. Small thing. The kind of thing you only see when you've been away. I had been gone 11 days. I was supposed to be gone 14, but the conference in Portland ended early, and my return flight on Thursday had an open seat, and something in my chest, some quiet instinct I had learned to trust after 63 years of living, told me to come home. It was 11:47 at night. I paid the driver, picked up my bag, and stood at the front door of the house I had lived in for 31 years. The porch light was off. I always leave the porch light on when I travel. I had reminded my daughter about it before I left. I even wrote it on the notepad on the kitchen counter. Porch light. Every night. The light was off. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the bulb had burned out. Maybe she had forgotten. My daughter was busy, I knew that. She had her own life, her own schedule. She had been generous enough to come stay with her mother while I was away, and I was grateful for that. I was always grateful for that. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was not right. I cannot explain it better than that. It was the smell, stale, still air, the way a room smells when windows have not been opened in days. It was the dishes in the sink, visible through the kitchen doorway, a stack of them that my wife Dorothy would never have allowed. Dorothy had kept this kitchen spotless for 31 years, even after the arthritis made it difficult. Even after the stroke slowed her right side. She was proud of this kitchen. She was proud of this home. I set my bag down quietly and walked toward the bedroom. Dorothy was lying on top of the covers, still dressed in the clothes I recognized from the last photo my daughter had sent me 4 days ago. The same blouse. The same gray cardigan. She had not changed in 4 days. The glass on her nightstand was empty and had a white ring at the bottom where liquid had dried. I picked it up. It was completely dry inside. I touched her hand. It was cool and papery, like old newspaper. "Dorothy," I said. She opened her eyes slowly. The way she looked at me, not with surprise, not with relief, but with the quiet desperation of someone who had been waiting so long they had stopped expecting. That look broke something open in me that I do not have words for even now. "Water," she said. Her voice was barely a sound. I went to the kitchen. I filled the glass. I came back and helped her sit up, and I watched my wife of 38 years drink 3 full glasses of water without stopping. "How long?" I said. It was not really a question. "I don't know," she said. "She brought something yesterday. I think it was yesterday. A cracker and some juice. A cracker and some juice." I had left detailed notes. I had typed them and printed them and taped them to the refrigerator. Dorothy's medications. Her meal schedule. The name and number of her physical therapist. The list of things she could not have because of her blood pressure. I had spent 45 minutes going over everything with my daughter before I got in the car to the airport. My daughter had nodded and said, "Dad, I know. I've got it. Go." I had gone. Now I sat on the edge of the bed and held Dorothy's hand and listened to the sound of the house. And then I heard it from upstairs, from the guest bedroom above us. The low vibration of music. Not loud. Careful. The kind of volume you use when you are trying not to be heard. My daughter had not been alone in my house. I want to stop here and tell you something about my daughter, whose name is Renee. She is 41 years old. She graduated top of her class from the University of Michigan. She is a licensed CPA, and she runs the accounting department for a logistics firm downtown. She is sharp, organized, capable. She is also the executor of our estate. I had trusted her with that because she was the organized one, the responsible one, the one who always read the fine print. She is also the one who, 2 years ago, began asking very specific questions about the house. At the time, I thought nothing of it. She asked about the mortgage paid off. Years ago, she asked about the property taxes. She asked, casually, at a Sunday dinner, whether Dorothy and I had considered a living trust. I told her we had a will and a lawyer, and everything was handled. She smiled and said, "Of course." She was just curious. I thought nothing of it. I should have thought about it. I went upstairs. I knocked on the guest room door. I heard scrambling, the sound of something being put away, and then the door opened and my daughter stood in front of me in the clothes she apparently slept in. Her hair pulled back, her expression cycling through surprise and guilt before landing on something carefully neutral. Behind her, sitting on the edge of the guest bed, was a man I had met exactly twice. His name was Derek. He was her boyfriend of 8 months. He had a firm handshake and not much else to recommend him, in my experience. "Dad," she said, "you weren't supposed to be back until Sunday." "Not. Is something wrong?" "Not. How is Mom?" "You weren't supposed to be back until Sunday." I looked at her for a long moment. "I am not a man who shouts. I was raised not to shout," I said very calmly. "Your mother hasn't had water today." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I need you to leave," I said. "Both of you. Tonight." She started to say something about overreacting, about how Dorothy had her call button, about how she had just checked on her an hour ago. I held up my hand. She stopped talking. She knew I could see in her eyes that she knew that whatever line she had crossed it fully. And there was no clever sentence that was going to walk it back. They were gone within 30 minutes. I sat with Dorothy until she fell asleep. Then I sat in the kitchen alone and tried to think clearly. The first thing I did the next morning was call our family doctor. Doctor. Anand had been Dorothy's physician for 12 years. I told him I had come home to find her dehydrated and in the same clothes for at least 4 days, and possibly longer. He told me to bring her in immediately. I did. In the exam room, "Doctor." Anand looked at her blood work and was quiet for a moment with the professional stillness that doctors use when they are deciding how much to tell you. Then he told me that her dehydration was moderate to severe, that her medication levels were not where they should be, that 2 of her prescriptions appeared to have been either missed entirely or administered inconsistently for an extended period, not days, but weeks. Weeks. "How long has she been presenting like this?" he asked me. "I don't know," I said. "I thought she was being cared for." He referred us to a specialist that afternoon. He also gave me a name, a social worker at the county office who handled cases of elder neglect. He said it gently, the way he said most things, but he said it clearly. Elder neglect. He said those words, and I sat in the hard plastic chair next to my wife and felt the floor shift underneath me. I drove home that evening, and I stood in the kitchen, and I tried to understand what I was dealing with. I had been traveling for work every month or 6 weeks for the past 2 years. Standard trips, never more than 2 weeks. Every time, Renee had come to stay. Every time, Dorothy had seemed fine when I returned. Tired, maybe quieter than usual, but fine. Now I had to ask myself, how long had fine actually been not fine? How long had I been looking at my wife through the lens of what I expected to see rather than what was actually there? I went to the medication cabinet. I counted the pills. I had refilled Dorothy's prescriptions before I left. The counts were wrong, not a little wrong, significantly wrong. Someone had been removing pills from the bottles without giving them to Dorothy. I sat down on the kitchen floor, 63 years old, sitting on the linoleum, and I felt very much like a man who had been a fool for a very long time. But I did not stay there long, because I am my father's son, and my father used to say that the moment you understand the problem clearly is the moment the problem begins to end. I understood the problem now. The first call I made was to our attorney, a man named Frank Delaney, who had handled our estate planning, and who I had known since we coached Little League together in 1997. I told him everything. He was quiet and then he said, "Don't touch anything in that house yet. Don't confront her again. And let me make some calls." The second call I made was to my brother-in-law, Roy, Dorothy's brother. He drove over that same evening and sat with me at the kitchen table and listened to everything and did not say a single word until I was finished. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" I told him. He said, "Done." Over the next 2 weeks, I did 3 things. The first thing was documentation. Roy and I had already installed a small security camera in the living room the previous year. One of those simple ones, motion activated, that uploads to the cloud. I had forgotten it existed, to be honest. Renee apparently had too. I pulled 3 weeks of footage from before my trip, and I sat and watched it, hour by hour, night by night. What I saw did not make me angry, exactly. Anger is hot and fast. What I felt was colder than that. On most days, Renee left the house by 9 in the morning and did not return until 6 or 7 in the evening. On some days, she did not return at all. The camera showed Dorothy alone from morning until night, pressing her call button that apparently went unanswered because Renee's number was the only one programmed to receive it. There were days Dorothy made it to the kitchen on her own, leaning on the counter, and ate whatever she could reach. There were days she didn't leave the bedroom. Derek was in my house on 14 separate occasions. There was footage of the two of them sitting in my living room watching television, eating food from my refrigerator, while Dorothy was in the bedroom 30 feet away. On one occasion, and this is the one I keep coming back to, the camera captured Renee walking into the bedroom, standing at Dorothy's bedside for approximately 90 seconds, and then walking back out to the living room where she turned on a movie and laughed at something on the screen. 90 seconds. The second thing I did was financial. I called my bank quietly and requested a full statement history for the joint account that Renee had access to for household expenses while I was traveling. The account I had set up 2 years ago so she could handle groceries, utilities, anything Dorothy needed. In 22 months, Renee had spent just over $41,000 from that account. I had been depositing $2,000 a month into it for household expenses. That is $44,000 over the same period. The account should have had money left over. There was less than $300 in it. I went through the statements line by line. I found the grocery charges irregular, infrequent, small. I found the pharmacy charges also infrequent, not matching the prescription schedule. And then I found the other charges. A furniture store in the suburb where Renee lived. A travel website. A restaurant I recognized as one she had mentioned once as her favorite, charged 7 times in 14 months. Clothing retailers. A home decor shop. She had been using my household account as a personal expense account for nearly 2 years. I printed every statement and put them in a folder and gave the folder to Frank. The third thing I did was the hardest, and it required my son. I have 2 children. Renee, who you know about, and my son Michael, who is 37 and lives in Columbus and whom I had, I am ashamed to say, somewhat kept in the dark about the situation with his mother over the past 2 years. Not deliberately, but Renee was the one who was present, and I had let her shape the narrative. And Michael was busy with his own family, and I had not wanted to worry anyone. I called Michael and I told him everything. The whole story. I did not soften it. There was a long silence on the phone, and then Michael said something I will not repeat here, and then he said, "I'm coming up this weekend." He came. He sat with his mother for a long afternoon, and I gave them privacy. When he came out, his eyes were red, and his jaw was set in a way I recognized from when he was a boy, and trying very hard not to cry in front of me. "Tell me what you need," he said. I told him. Michael was the one who contacted the county social worker. He was the one who sat with the investigator and gave a formal account. He was thorough and he was calm, and he was devastating in the way that only someone who loves a person completely can be when describing what was done to her. Renee did not know any of this was happening. She had called me twice since I sent her away. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The message was an explanation she had been overwhelmed. She had not realized how bad things had gotten with Mom. She was sorry. It was a practice message. She had rehearsed it. The second call I answered. She asked if we could talk. I said yes, of course. I said I thought that was a good idea. I said why didn't she come to the house on Saturday? We could sit down together. The 3 of us, her, Michael, and me. She agreed immediately. She seemed relieved. She brought a coffee cake. Frank was in the study. The county investigator was in the study. The documentation was on the table in the study. The bank statements were in 3 neat folders. The camera footage had been copied onto a drive. We sat in the living room, and I let Renee talk. She talked for about 15 minutes. She apologized to me, carefully and specifically, for things that were true but minor. She was contrite about Derek being there. She was remorseful about the medications. She used the word overwhelmed 4 times. She did not mention the $41,000. She did not mention the footage. When she finished, I said, "Renee, I need to show you something." I walked her to the study. I introduced her to the investigator. I opened the first folder. I have thought many times about what I expected to see in her face in that moment. Shame, maybe. Remorse. Possibly even relief, the strange relief that some people feel when the thing they've been carrying is finally set down. What I saw instead was calculation. Even then, even standing in front of the bank statements, even hearing the investigator explain what they were looking at, she was calculating. What could be denied? What could be explained? What could be walked back? That calculation told me everything I needed to know about whether what had happened was a mistake or a choice. I am going to skip over the weeks that followed. Not because they were uneventful, but because they were the kind of difficult that is private. There were lawyers and there were county proceedings, and there were conversations between Michael and his sister that I was not part of, and that I chose not to be part of. Dorothy went through additional treatment and a medication adjustment that took several weeks to stabilize. There were nights she was frightened and nights she was confused and nights she held my hand and didn't say anything at all, and neither did I. Those nights were actually not the worst part. Those nights, in a way, were the most honest thing that had happened in my house in a long time. Renee was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and criminal neglect. Her attorney negotiated. I will not tell you the exact outcome because it is still in process, but I will tell you that she is no longer the executor of our estate, and she no longer has access to any account with my name on it. I will tell you that her employer was contacted in the course of the investigation and that she is no longer employed there. I will tell you that Frank has filed a civil suit, and we expect to recover a significant portion of what was taken. I will also tell you that I changed the will. I did not do it in anger, though I understand if that is what you assume. I did it because I sat down one evening with a legal pad and tried to write honestly about what I want my life to have meant. What I want the things I spent 63 years building to do after I am gone. And when I wrote it down plainly, the answer was not complicated. I established a trust. The house, when Dorothy and I no longer need it, will go to a foundation that supports in-home care for elderly adults who cannot afford it. I made Michael trustee not because I favor him, but because he drove 4 hours and held his mother's hand and told the truth to an investigator when it was uncomfortable to do so. The coffee cake Renee brought is still in the freezer. I have no idea why I haven't thrown it away. Sometimes I look at it and feel something I do not have a clean name for grief. Maybe for the daughter I believed I had raised. For the version of the future I had imagined. But then Dorothy calls from the other room and I go to her. And she is sitting up in bed with her crossword puzzle and her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, and she looks up at me and says something ordinary, something about needing a word for a 6-letter river in Africa. And the ordinary is so extraordinary to me now that I have to take a breath before I can answer. She is getting stronger. It is slow and it is not a straight line, but she is getting there. Dr. Anand says the medication is stabilized. The physical therapist comes 3 mornings a week. A real therapist. A good one. Someone whose name I know, and whose schedule I track, and whose notes I read after every session. I am home now. I have rearranged things so that I am home. People have asked me if I regret being away so often, and I understand why they ask. I have thought about it honestly. The answer is yes. I have regret, but the regret is not the useful kind. The useful kind is the kind that changes what you do next. And what I do next is this. I am home. I cook breakfast. I sit with Dorothy in the evenings. I have learned which crossword puzzles she likes and which ones she finds too easy and which ones she finds too hard and pretends otherwise. I was asked recently, by someone who knows our situation, whether I could ever forgive my daughter. I did not answer right away. I thought about it for several days, actually, before I settled on what I believe. I think forgiveness, the real kind, is not something you decide to do once. It is something you work toward the way you work toward anything that matters, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks. I am not there. I may not get there. But I do not carry hatred for her, because hatred is weight that belongs to the person you hate, and I have already carried her weight for long enough without knowing it. What I carry instead is clarity about what matters, about who showed up, about the difference between the people in your life who are there for what you have and the people who are there for who you are. Dorothy is the latter. Michael is the latter. Roy, who came over without being asked and sat at my kitchen table and said, "What do you need?" He is the latter. The rest, I am learning to put down. The porch light is on every night now. I make sure of it. It is a small thing, and I know it is a small thing. But there is something about doing that small thing every evening, checking the switch, seeing the light come on, knowing that anyone coming home in the dark will be able to find the door that feels, to me, like the right way to end a day. Some evenings Dorothy is still awake when I come back inside, and she asks what I was doing, and I tell her I was checking the light, and she nods like that is the most reasonable thing she has ever heard. And I suppose it is.